start just by talking about, we're standing here in front of the dam. You come into work every day and you get a visual representation of where we are.
Yes.
What's that like?
It's a great honor to be able to work at the Lower Colorado River Authority because we have here in Central Texas one of the fastest growing regions in the state of Texas, which means in the nation. And we serve as one of the major water suppliers for over 1 million people. So it's a humbling thing.
Do you ever come out here and you look at the water and you say, golly, like we need to be doing more. There's more that we should be doing.
I think what I notice more often than anything in this particular part of the watershed is just the seasons and how we're cyclical in the way that we use water and the way we receive water into the system, and the seasons really bear on that.
Just talking about here we are, the historic nature, how have you watched the changes with the seasons and everything? How have you watched all that unfold?
Well, the biggest thing for people that have not lived in Central Texas for very long is the fact that we're in an area that's very prone to the extremes of droughts and floods. And we cycle in between periods of extreme flooding like we saw in 2018 and 2019 versus the type of drought conditions that we've seen over the last 3 years.
So with that, kind of getting into the more formal part of the interview, I'd love to start just by talking about these new water restrictions.
Yes. Yes.
What is that going to do towards further efforts towards conservation?
Well, we updated our drought contingency plan about a year ago, and one of the things that we added was not just looking at our water supplies in the reservoirs, but also in the conditions in the watershed, basically the type of water flowing into the reservoirs. And that allowed us to be able to go to our stage 2 condition on March the 1st, earlier than what we would have previously. So it's a little bit more conservative than what we would have had in the past.
And with that, as we talk about water conservation efforts and everything like that, what part does increasing the water restriction play in the narrative of going towards conservation?
Well, one of the things that's really important as we begin to go into the spring and the summer, which is when we use more of our water in Central Texas, is the fact that we're asking for some additional measures to be put in place. We're also limiting outdoor watering from our customers to no more than once a week. And we know from the data that one of the biggest water users in our area that we can control is landscape watering.
Since you brought that up, this is actually a question that Avery had further on, but talking about irrigation.
Yes.
A major factor in water conservation. He wants to ask, are there any plans now or in the future to address that problem specifically, including incentives for people to not use as much water?
Right. Well, first and foremost, the drought contingency plan stage 2 has a limit of no more than once a week watering for landscape irrigation for our customers. And our customers in turn pass that along, cities and districts pass that along to their customers. So that's an important thing to know going into the summer. But in this part of the world, we're really thinking longer term about water conservation measures and what kind of things can be put in place that people can do on an individual basis to conserve water more. And specifically that goes down to what type of turf they put in their yard and what type of plants and landscaping they put in their yards, because those increasingly are going to need to be able to live on water no more than once a week.
So we're coming off of, I believe it's 4 months now of less than expected rainfall. How has that changed LCRA's perspective on where we're going to head specifically as we go into the summer now?
It doesn't really change our perspective because we plan for these conditions mostly. I mean, every month we revise our projections, taking a look at the basin conditions and the amount of water that we have in water supply. And we have a bandwidth of looking at everything from what happens if it floods to what happens if it doesn't rain at all. And we've been tracking very conservatively over the last several months. And indeed, our basin conditions look like we've had drought for the last several years. If you take a look at Lake Travis and you take a look at Buchanan, which are our 2 water supply reservoirs, they show that we've been in drought conditions.
I guess if I can, just to follow up to that, how long can you project conservative estimates? How long before we reach a breaking point, if that makes sense?
Well, it all depends on what happens during the course of the year, because we continue to have events that bring water into the basin, and we also have discretion on how much water goes out of the basin. So if Central Texans really participate in water conservation measures and change the way that they do their landscaping, so that when we're in August and July, which are the really highest water use months that we've got, that they use much less water. That allows us to be able to promote a supply that lasts longer than if people really don't conserve water the way that they should.
With that, another question that Avery asked is assuming that we don't have any floods like there's a possibility for as we head into the summer, with assuming that we have another situation like we had last spring, what is that going to do as we head into the summer?
Sure.
And how are we making those projections?
Well, if you compare to where we are today versus where we were a year ago, we're actually ahead of where we were a year ago. Our basin conditions are in better shape than what we were. We're over 160,000 acre feet more supply than what we had this time last year. Travis is 6 feet higher than it was this time last year, and Buchanan is 7.5 feet higher than it was last year. So we're going into 2025 in better shape than we were this time a year ago in 2024.
And is that this time? Sorry, I think you answered in that last sentence. That's this time last year.
Yeah. Our basin conditions and water supply conditions are better this year than they were last year.
With that, so what kind of countermeasures can be done to make sure that we
Sure.
continue performing?
Well, that's one of the reasons why it was really important that we changed our drought contingency plan so that these additional conservation measures kick in sooner rather than later. Having the once a week watering in place now as we go into the spring is really helpful for people. You know, when we start to have warm weather in the Austin area, people want to go to their local stores and to be able to buy the plants to beautify their yards, or maybe decide whether they want to put in a yard. And now knowing that in the summertime we're only going to have access to water for our landscaping once a week should shape the decisions that they make. And it's really something that has two benefits. It benefits us from a water conservation standpoint, but those plants that use less water also mean lower water bills.
And again, assuming we're in kind of a worst case scenario with drought mitigation efforts, how do countermeasures, as we are now heading into the summer, compare to countermeasures that were put into place last year?
They're kicking in earlier this year than what they had done previously. So we actually have the ability to go into our stage 2 of our drought contingency plan well ahead of when we would have traditionally.
And what does that do by approaching it earlier?
It should allow us to have much less water going out of the system than what we would have had previously.
With that, another thing Avery asked, the Arbuckle Reservoir is coming online this spring as of last check. Is that going to have any immediate impact on the water releases from the epidemic?
Well, yeah, Arbuckle Reservoir is being tested as we speak. We hope to have it online later on in the spring. What that allows us to do is to be able to take care of our water, some of our water needs in the lower basin with local reservoir. It's not going to mean that we don't ever have to release any water from the Highland Lakes for our needs downstream, because we have water users like the City of Austin and the City of Pflugerville and local entities that need to have water pass through Lake Travis and out of Mansfield Dam every day. So our Highland Lakes are going to continue to be a part of the water supply solution and a big part of the water supply solution, but adding Arbuckle for the first time gives us a place to be able to actually capture water that happens, rainfall that happens downstream of the City of Austin.
Kind of going ahead to, again, the summer projections. The current range of forecasts, Avery writes, for water elevation at Lake Travis. The driest forecast puts Lake Travis at its lowest elevation since at least 2014 by the start of August, ahead of when more substantial decreases typically occur. Then he asks, at what point are we going to put in the most significant protocols in place to prevent further water decreases and more conservation efforts?
Well, first off, it's important to note that we don't just look at Lake Travis. Lake Travis is closest to us here in the Austin area, but Lake Travis is only part of our water supply. Lake Travis is in partnership with Lake Buchanan, and the two of those reservoirs provide our water supply. So we'll be looking at the combined storage of those two reservoirs as we look at future drought contingency measures.
But is there going to be a point when you look at the situation and say, okay, we've got to put in our most...
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The drought contingency plan that we have in place and that our customers have in place go off of combined storage levels. So when combined storage levels drop, it will then beg questions about triggering the next level of drought contingency plan, which would be our third level of drought contingency plan.
In the LCRA, you have certain things that you guys can do. Is there any work that you see other bodies, governing bodies, putting into effect that would significantly help when it comes to conservation
Sure. Yeah, local communities in Central Texas are really shoulder the burden of deciding what's right for their local communities in terms of additional conservation measures. And that's going to look different for every community that's around here. In some cases, they may have a lot of common areas that are watered, that they make decisions about how they're going to water those common areas, or say sport fields and that sort of thing. In other examples, it might be more of a vacation home type community where you have a lot of people kind of coming in and out, and they have to determine how they're going to respond with conservation measures. So it's going to look a little bit different everywhere you are.
And over the last decade, we've seen kind of a return to normalcy as far as El Nino temperature patterns go. Does that give you confidence as we head into the future, essentially?
I always take a wait and see approach when I look at El Nino, La Nina. The fact that we're moving hopefully towards neutral conditions and out of La Nina conditions statistically should mean better opportunities for rainfall for us. But we, as a practical matter at LCRA, have to plan for drought and for floods no matter what El Nino or La Nina does. So I'd love to see El Nino come back, because that increases our chances of the type of rainfall that replenishes our reservoirs. But I'll know when I see it, basically. Right. Well, I mean, I think one of the most important things is to understand what we can control and what we can't control. So there are certain elements of living in Central Texas, such as the heat and the sunshine that we get in the summertime. It's one of the reasons why people want to move here, but it also gets really hot, and our evaporation rates can go really high in a hot, dry Texas summer. We also understand that it's an area of extremes, and in a month we can see the exact condition flip and go into a flood posture. So particularly for people that are new to the region, this kind of embracing the extremes and riding through the extremes is something that we really want to encourage people to lean into and to understand. I think when it comes to how we set our yards up, we can set ourselves up to save money and to use less water. And going forward, that's really going to be important for us here in Central Texas. And everybody has a role to play in terms of conservation. So we need to think more in terms of individual responsibility and the things that we can do on a day in, day out basis. Yes, it's the little things like we teach our kids, don't let the water run while you're brushing your teeth, take shorter showers. That's all important things that we can do. But it's really important in terms of how much water gets used. The majority of our water in the hottest, driest part of the summer is actually going outdoors on our lawns. And that's discretionary water use. That's not water that we have to stay alive necessarily. So that's areas where we can really focus on trying to reduce our water consumption.